Welcome, my name is Nat. Exceptional Individuals does interactive webinars every week. Today, we are doing a deep dive in dyslexia in your 50s. Disclaimer, I'm not 50, but that's okay. It's the demographic I did my research project in for my master's. It's a really interesting age. It's mostly like the forgotten generation when it comes to understanding neurodivergence. And we're going to be pulling it apart. We're going to be looking at age, gender, background, biology, societal norms, and seeing how they all play in together. Now, today we are definitely just focusing on dyslexia. I was lucky enough to be diagnosed at a young age, but a lot of people are finding that they may be dyslexic or neurodivergent later in life, sometimes due to people's children. Or what we will soon learn is something called dyslexic burnout. I've also started a brand new podcast. It's a good way to chat to other people with different professions, ideas. The first one we got is Georgia Shaw, who is Apprentice of the Year, literally knows everything about apprenticeships. What are the pros, what are the cons? I think this is really good, particularly if you're early stage in your careers. It's just a friendly chat, and it's also available on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from, which I've always wanted to say. So topics today we are going to address is looking at late diagnosis. And to save on some real estate, I'm using the abbreviation of DX to refer to diagnosis, just so you're aware. We are going to be looking at difficulties in reading and language today. You may be diagnosed, you may not be diagnosed, but to be honest, doesn't really matter. If you find certain areas challenging, that's what we care about today. Some quick terms, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Dyslexia is basically the combination between reading, spelling, and phonological awareness. That's how you pronounce words. While different areas can affect people in different ways, if you have one or more of these difficulties prolonged throughout your life, that maybe could be a sign of dyslexia. But when it comes to age and dyslexia, memory and processing does shift. So you can expect for a natural slowdown. Nothing to worry about, but it's part of the package. Menopause and andropause now are really relevant today. As you get older, your body goes through hormonal changes. That does, believe it or not, impact dyslexia. How does it impact dyslexia? Dyslexia is a lifelong condition. It's something which is with you forever. However, as we get older, we learn strategies, support. Sometimes it can lay dormant. But when our body is going through a lot of changes, essentially it can roll up to sand again. And what has been previously concealed can come to the surface. Then we're going to look at some strategies, tips and tricks. Why even have a late diagnosis? What are the kind of identifications on it? We're going to look a little bit at neuroplasticity. Our brain does adapt less. It's still always adapting. Essentially, say you've got two cables here and a cable snaps, it can reconnect somewhere else and you'll have an alternative route in your brain. One route can shrivel away and another route can get stronger. And it's reason why it's more difficult to learn new things. You know the old expression, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can, but it just takes a lot more work. Then we've got self-advocacy, supporting yourself. We've got assistive tech, looking at things that can help you in day-to-day life. Also, the fatigue of living with dyslexia. It's exhausting sometimes. I can read, but I'm knackered at the end of it because my brain is working twice as hard. In a nutshell, looking at the old ICD, International Clarification of Diseases and Disorders, dyslexia is lifelong. Guess what? If you got diagnosed in your 50s, it didn't just pop up, you've always had it. It impacts reading, but more importantly, comprehension. As adults, most individuals are able to read, but it's a comprehension. It's how we understand the words, the patterns, the hieroglyphics, and how we make sense of them, which is the real buffer. Challenges change with age, but support can help. It's not that dyslexia gets worse, it just changes. Being aware of these changes can definitely help us. About 1 in 10 people have dyslexia. But as you look at the older population, less have dyslexia. Why is that? It's just because they don't know they have dyslexia. It's not that it just disappears or they never had it, or there's an epidemic of young people having difficulties with reading and comprehension. It's always been there. Our understanding is changing. But what is so special about 50? A few years back, we did Dyslexia at 40s, our most viewed video on YouTube, actually. If we add 10 years into it, does it look any different? While there are similarities, the main difference is when it comes to menopause or andropause. One is starting, the other one you're either full into it or maybe coming to the ends of that. There are changes. Here is the Componential model of reading. I think this is a good model to help people understand why dyslexic is for life, not just for Christmas. Because essentially, you've got to have cognitive challenges, psychological, and ecological. In a nutshell, we've got how the brain recognizes words and understanding. This is something which is with you for life, even though you can learn strategies to overcome some of the difficulties with it. Psychological, this might be your motivations, your learning style, personal preference. This again does shift throughout your life, but you never get rid of it. Ecological, this is your upbringing, your environment, how you were taught, whether you went to a good school, a bad school, where your parents read to you at night, or whether they didn't read to you. It's this whole combo. All three areas play a massive part on whether or not you got help early on, or if you didn't get help. Maybe your parents didn't know about dyslexia. Why would they even look into it? Maybe your school had no funding. Why would you ever get tested? Yes, you struggled, but you found ways to overcome it. We've got to look at it from this whole approach. I want to know, were you diagnosed late? No, if you weren't diagnosed. Yes, if you were diagnosed late. Last one, pre-18. So if you were diagnosed early. Just so we know, anyone who's diagnosed after 18 is considered a late diagnosis. Reading is what you think about dyslexia. Now, some people can cheat the system. You find coping mechanisms, you find ways around it. However, when you get to 50, or any other age to be honest, the other challenges which have always been there, they start to rise to the surface. Think of it like dyslexic global warming. Language skills, cognitive challenges, compensational strategies, emotional impact, all these other things that come with it, they start to become more prominent. That's why people might seek support later on. Or something that was never really an issue suddenly is an issue. And now you want to look at alternative support strategies. Now, when we say dyslexia, it's a big category. It's not just simple bog standard dyslexia. You could have acquired dyslexia, which typically comes as a result of a stroke or trauma. Or you could have what most people would have is developmental dyslexia, which is genetic. It's where you see these words and you struggle to break them apart. It could be like, again, if we're using the word cat, it's like cat. You struggle with breaking it apart. Whereas the other type, it's like the word cat, you might draw a blank. Depending on what type of dyslexia you have, the support strategies that may benefit you could change. I just want to get an idea on what decade were you born in? Because this is actually going to play quite a significant part in your and other people's understanding about how your brain works. Were you born in the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, or 50s? Okay, we've got 60s. The reason why this is important is depending what decade you were in, either dyslexia didn't exist. People thought it was a disorder, a disease. It was something that was your parents' fault. It was your fault. You couldn't be a minority and dyslexic at the same time. Your place in history impacts quite significantly your understanding today. Maybe you didn't want to get diagnosed because it was seen as a bad thing. Maybe you came from an upbringing where there was a low income, so you also wouldn't get a diagnosis. Most of you are from the 70s. Nice. We've got a few people in the 60s. No one pre-50s. Never mind. Yep, no whippersnappers today. Again, makes sense. I just want to, before we dive in a bit more deeper, look at the kind of building blocks of dyslexia to really hit home. This isn't something that just developed overnight. Depending on your environmental situation, so for instance, schools, let's face it, were pretty unanimously terrible when it came to understanding learning differences. It's been proven that the earlier you get support, the better your strategies and techniques for living and managing dyslexia as you grow up are. Then we got social economic factors. If you got money, you get help. If you don't have money, you don't get help. Again, early interventions are crucial. There are still things that can be done. Then you've got the genetic element, which is hereditary. So it runs in the family. Essentially, there's nothing that you could have done. It was beyond your control. It's from your great-grandfather, who was probably dyslexic. Even since hunter and gatherer times, we've had different thinkers, and they have been seen as an asset to society, not a hindrance. It's only in the last 100 years where we've been not so favourable to the other. Then you've got chromosomal changes. Ultimately, it does come down to mutations in our DNA. Now, mutations might sound a little bit like, ugh, but it's actually perfectly natural. Our DNA is always changing and reforming, and different changes will have different effects. Dyslexia is a combination of these things. The way it manifests is also very different. It can look like reading difficulties or writing. It can very well go along with autism, with ADHD. It very rarely goes alone. Memory difficulties, language. What some people will find is in early years, they struggle with reading. In later years, they struggle with memory or processing. Again, it can change, but it is always there. As we get to 50, the body's going through changes, just like in your teenage years. What I want you to do is you hopefully got a little pin, and you can put a pin on any of these which you have experienced. I think you can only pick one, so pick wisely. But in females, it is very typical that you'll naturally get a bit more forgetful. Hot flushes is very common. Nausea, heart palpitations, irregular periods, vaginal dryness, joints, aches and pains. I'll be honest, none of this is overly glamorous, but it's some of the facts of life. On men, you might have decreased motivation, low energy, muscle loss, erectile dysfunction. These are things which may have not been a problem beforehand. Now, because you have these additional things to deal with, the coping and masking strategies that you learned along the way for your dyslexia, suddenly that's becoming a bit of a burden. So imagine you've got a backpack on and you're fine, but then someone puts a massive rock in the backpack, suddenly you're not fine. That's where the struggle comes from. It's when the balance gets off kilter. Other things that affect both genders is mood swings, depression, headaches, night sweats, insomnia, bone loss. Eeks, don't sign me up for old age. Now, I would love to know, in your own opinions, those of you who have been through or are going through menopause or andropause, did you notice that your dyslexic characteristics have either gotten worse, gotten better, or have stayed the same? It really is different for everyone. 100% got worse. Wow, that's pretty damning right there. That is also not surprising. I'd be very surprised if it got better. Some people, it does stay the same. Anna Marie, andropause is the male equivalent to menopause. It doesn't affect men in the same way, but it's essentially a decrease in hormones. Now, for those of you who have reached 50 or are approaching it, have you noticed any other changes in life? I'm a bit more tired, or actually I'm more grateful. It could be positive or negative or neutral. We're just looking at any changes whatsoever. Some examples include slow recall, info absorption, light sensitivity, noise struggles, menopause effects, fatigue, sleep. In case you're wondering, why is Tom Cruise on the slide? He has dyslexia and over 50. Okay, we've got sleep issues. Yep, the body struggles to wind down, also relates to hormonal changes. Fatigue, low tolerance of nonsense. That is an official thing. Anyone else? Any other changes? We got insomnia and anger mood swings. That also makes a lot of sense. Sleep anxiety. No, in fact, I am more motivated and struggle. That I know I work harder. I think that's interesting because, yes, the body is changing. You are having an influx of hormones more or less than you had before, but mentally, you've got a different outlook, a different perspective. You do find people's happiness actually goes up the older they get. It's weird, isn't it? The expression, youth is wasted on the young, I think is only becoming truer and truer the older I get. Low noise, loss of memory retention, very tired, suffering fatigue, anxiety, ADHD, autism presentations. Okay, things are happening. Why does late or misdiagnosis typically happen in adults? We've already talked about the hormonal changes and how it adds more of a cognitive load, which means it's harder to mask what we have previously kept at bay. But there are other things, such as bias. Why someone may have not been diagnosed previously is that there is this bias that only young people have dyslexia, or only boys get dyslexia, or only white people have dyslexia. Unfortunately, these biases have been and are a thing. Definitely why it might have only taken to now as we're getting more progressive as a society. There's also the protective effect. Now, this is a really interesting theory, and it talks about why women often go undiagnosed. It's because women have different coping mechanisms or different ways of presenting than their male counterparts. For instance, you're in school and a boy has dyslexia, they're going to be naughty and they're going to act out. Teachers, you're naughty, let's go get you a dyslexia assessment. But the girl is, however, I'm just going to keep myself quiet. Then they go and never get support. Obviously, that's a generalization. However, I think it's quite a true one in terms of, is it socially acceptable for girls to be as disruptive as boys are? People do treat the different genders different. The other thing that you'll notice is that people often misdiagnose you. You might have dyslexia, but people might think maybe it's just a language delay or it's ADHD. Because people are looking for male characteristics, it often goes unspotted in women. If you are interested in understanding more about the female protective effect, there's this good book called Invisible Women, and it looks about how the world is completely biased towards women, particularly from a diagnostic perspective. This book isn't about dyslexia per se, but essentially you can make the link. It affects all areas of life. Different things are different in different genders, but typically our research has always been male focused. If you have more mild or different symptoms to this very narrow checklist of what people are looking for, then you could go undiagnosed. A diagnosis, it's basically a tick box. And if you have a different ticks or in different boxes that weren't predefined, you could easily get it missed. Then we've got having a professional evaluation. Not all evaluations are the most professional. Some people have limited experience. Some people might only be diagnosed in certain areas. And some people might only have experience diagnosing males from certain cultures. So these are all things that we need to take in consideration. Let's have a look at menopause. There is a similar male equivalent. This is understanding why symptoms may worsen, but research is still a bit lacking. When you're younger, you've got your estrogen. It's all right. And you get to your 30s, 35, bam, you've got the most estrogen you're ever going to have. After 35, it starts dropping. Boop. By 50, it's getting low. Each stage of your life, this is going to affect mood swing, sleeping, body regulation, and dyslexia. If you look here, most people are diagnosed younger, in like pre-20s, and most late diagnoses typically happen from 40 onwards. When you look at this diagram, you can see the relationship. Because it is an area which is lacking research, it is a very difficult thing to explain to your GP. This is an area they are getting better at, but if you help connect the dots, it might speed along the process. If you are struggling with dyslexic characteristics heightened due to menopause, there isn't much public advice available for it. A lot of the time you have to find advice on one area and on the other area and join them together yourself. Let's roll back a little bit now to the swinging 60s, a bit of flower power. And this also will help people know why culturally a lot of you now are getting a bit curious. I've heard of this dyslexia thing. I'd like to know a little bit more about it. But why is that? In 1968, the DSM-2, the Diagnostical Statistical Manual, Mental Health Disorders, did not even list dyslexia. Early 70s wasn't a thing. Also, in the ICD, the kind of European equivalent, also wasn't a thing. It gives you an example that even, we're not talking that long ago, dyslexia wasn't officially recognised. Hence why people are still incredibly slow to understand dyslexia effectively. In the 60s, not included. In the 70s, it's called a specific reading disorder. 90s, still specific reading disorder. And only relatively recently, it's been called a developmental learning disorder with impairments in reading. Dyslexia really is not very well understood. I would love to know, when were you diagnosed? I know some of you have already shared with me, but let me know here. I want to find out what is the average diagnostic age. Now, if you were not diagnosed, just say when you were suspected. While you are doing that, I would like to have a look at the dual root core cascade model of reading. Basically, there's two ways of reading. You got the lexicon route and the non-lexicon route. With one of them, let's say you get a book and then you see the book, you're recognizing and processing letters. Let's go one route. You recognize the word. I recognize that word, cat. I understand what it means, meow. Then you start speaking it, cat, because you're used to it. It's a familiar word to you. Then you combine the sounds. Okay, cat, yeah, cat. Or there is the other route where you're processing letters, then you're sounding out the word. Okay, I don't know this word. Ka, ah, then you combine the words. So essentially, there are two main routes of reading. Those with dyslexia typically struggle with the right one, being able to sound words out. But if they've seen the word, absolutely no problem. Depending on when you were diagnosed, you had different expectations on how you were expected to read. Ultimately, if you have difficulties with either, could be dyslexia, but predominantly we're looking at sounding it out. The right one, they're different. One is about memory, one is about processing. The first one, in the kind of two ways of reading, is being able to see it and know what it means. For instance, let's say I had a bit of paper that said phone on it. You wouldn't need to read phone to know what it is because you've seen that word before. However, if I did a word that you had never seen before, you'd be like, I have no idea what that word is, so I'm going to have to break it apart bit by bit. For those of you who got diagnosed later on, I would love to have a better understanding about the difference it has made in your life. If you could share your thoughts and opinions on life before getting a diagnosis and afterwards, I think that would be really interesting, particularly for those who are looking at getting a diagnosis. For instance, would you recommend it? Should you even bother? Has it made a big difference? Anyway, we've got more understanding from other people. It explains why I have struggled so much when studying and career, puts life in a bit of perspective, helps with understanding. Not so confident before as it was undiagnosed, compare with others, unable to process feelings. This is true about students. I do think it does give a bit of context, doesn't it? It can help other people who be like, why are you struggling with this? Having a name to say it's dyslexia can normally take some of the burden off. We've got diagnosis definitely helped me understand why struggling with study was slow and process of ideas. Yep. Be prepared to adapt myself and understanding. It seems that it's helped both you personally and also people around you to better understand. Sir Anthony Hopkins, who has dyslexia and autism, I would love to know your motivations for getting a diagnosis. You made it this far in life. Was there any benefit or reasoning behind thinking, you know what, today's the day I'm going to do it? Eva says, only got a diagnosis of autism yet, but it was extremely helpful. So now I'm working on getting a diagnosis for dyslexia and possibly ADHD. Do you know what, I'm always interested in understanding those who get multiple diagnoses, because I have found one diagnosis typically is enough to get the ball rolling for me to have better understanding, but I could see why for certain ones, having a combination can be helpful. Some things can become more difficult to manage, yeah? It's only now that I have found out how my brain works that suddenly people are saying, oh, Nat, you're so smart. Make up your mind. Which one am I? I'm sick of being labelled by my intelligence my whole life, so I get that. To make sense of the way I feel and my struggles, yep, it can definitely put life in context. Burnout from working so hard and looking for easier ways to manage. Yep, it can sometimes take the pressure off of you. It isn't your fault. It can help with self-esteem. I find that's to be a really big one. I have found that motivations in later life tends to come from more of a personal thing. Hey, I just want to give my life some context, opposed to actively seeking additional support, which people do normally in their early 20s. Paul says, head of occupational health, though I had dyslexia after depressive period off work. It makes sense, because when you are depressed, everything else takes a fall. You've been masking all this time, and you probably didn't even realize it. Talking of masking, this is what we mean when we talk about dyslexic burnout. Let's say you have dyslexia. Dyslexia, I've got this managed. Maybe life starts getting a bit heavier. Maybe depression kicks in. Maybe work ramps up a notch. Suddenly, you're struggling. Then you're starting to overcompensate. Okay, I know I'm struggling, so I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You basically start juggling. Then you get exhausted. This is not sustainable. Then you burn out. You're like, oh God, I'm done. But don't worry, You will recover, then you start recovering, then you start struggling again, then you start overcompensating. This is why you get this spiral. If you look at this as a life cycle, when you're younger, you might struggle. Then in your early 20s, you might start overcompensating. Then when you get to your 40s, you might get exhausted. By the 50s, you might completely burn out. But when you get a diagnosis, you start to understand yourself a bit better. Then you can work to recovery. While struggle will happen again, because dyslexia is lifelong, you'll be better equipped to find support strategies that actually work for you now in your current stage of life. I think understanding it can be really helpful. It can help you overcome past traumas, being called stupid your entire life. You can educate others. Actually, that is relating to my dyslexia and isn't due to me not understanding or caring. You can seek support looking at strategies or networks or groups. Other reasons is people's children. He just got diagnosed with dyslexia and he's exactly like me. Maybe I have dyslexia, which is also a really common one. I was told during school I could not be dyslexic as I was bright. That is a classic mistake. This is the main tell, IQ not matching spelling age. Helen, that is a very typical gender differences because girls typically are more advanced at a younger age than their male counterparts, so they are seen as not needing help. This cycle live often in my life, maybe 2 times a year. Yeah, Rodrigo, you're right. While I gave this as a kind of lifelong cycle, it does happen in mini cycle. Well, every couple of months, maybe every quarter, I go through the whole cycle where I go from highs to lows. John Wicks wasn't a good student. The reason he wasn't a good student is because he struggled with reading. He probably got support. Whereas if he was a girl, he probably carried on being a good student, even though he was having difficulties. So a good example. What is something you wish you knew earlier about dyslexia? To those people who are going through the journey right now, any top tips? Anything that you're like, you know what? That would have been useful. I wish I knew dyslexia was real because I could have done something about it. There are reasons for struggling. Yep, that would have been great to know. Hey, you're not stupid. There's a reason why you're struggling. Actually, it's more to do with the teaching style. Technology really helps, so give it a try. I learned predominantly audibly. Yeah, knowing that, okay, I'm more of an auditory learner. I learned that in secondary school and it was a game changer for me because I was struggling all through early education. Some of us learn it earlier, some people learn it later. These are really good things. I would say to summarize, find out what your learning style is. How do you prefer to learn? Know that if there are challenges, it is genetically, but I think more importantly, socially, it is due to the way that our education system is created. It isn't created for diverse learners. This is part of me and it makes me, and I can think outside of the box. Yeah, so knowing your strengths as well. Doing visible and doing a bit more of a doer learner. If you're dyslexic, what should I do? You can get a GP assessment. In the UK, you can go to the NHS. However, expect delays. Therapy, occupational therapists and speech therapists can help you make those connections stronger. Because as you can see, I struggle with pronunciation a lot. But I'm fine with it now. It's charming almost. Go to groups and online groups like this. There are other online ones. Different clinics. Find accommodations in the workplace. Maybe having additional time. Maybe having things in different formats. Maybe having a quiet space when you're having to do concentration. Recording your meetings. Lots of break times. Do not underestimate the power of a break to refresh your cognition. There are plenty of support available, not just from exceptional individuals, but from everywhere. We've also mentioned about tech. Now, there is so much tech that is useful. Some of you might not be very good with tech, but there is tech for everyone. You've got, which is text-to-speech software. So we'll read your text out loud.
TTS, Natural Reader, VoiceOver.
I use it all the time. Then you've got STT, speech to text. This is software like Dragon, Google Voice Typing, e-readers like Kindles to always be able to have text grammar software like Grammarly, word prediction, Google Spell Check, but also there's much more advanced ones. Honestly, I'd be lost without my Google Calendars. Different mind maps. For some people, they are more visual and they'll find mind maps easier. Audio, I listen to audiobooks. It's just a different way of reading. And different notes and different browsers. using little smart home devices, I'm continuously saying, Alexa, spell awesome. There are so many tools that can make a massive difference. Which one works? That's up to you. Different tools work for different people. One book that I would like to recommend is called The Adult Side of Dyslexia, and it gives some really interesting insights on the different challenges and strengths that come with having dyslexia as an adult. That's from Keely Sandman Hurley. If you are more academically inclined, there are some interesting journal articles which talk about dyslexia in adulthood, which, while they aren't the easiest read, they are really useful, and a lot of them can be found online for free, most of them. If you are dyslexic and would want support, particularly in the workplace, we do workplace needs assessments. We can help you understand your ND better, identify barriers, get support, work on your strengths, and have ongoing guidance. This is something which is a paid service we do for around the world, or it's something that you can do via the UK government grant. However, it is slow. There are pros and cons. Do check it out. Finally, if you want to get in contact, go to our website, exceptionalindividuals.com. You can drop me an email. You can add me on LinkedIn via this QR code. I hope you found that interesting and were able to learn a thing or two. Thank you so much for coming, and please do sign up for future ones if you are ever in the neighborhood.